There is a secret that most pro athletes, elite CEOs, and high performers all know. They all have a group of world class coaches working for them to help them optimize their potential. At Super Athlete Radio, our goal is to provide you with the caliber of world class coaches and guests to help you unlock your potential, dominate your industry, and dominate your life. Let's get better today. And I'm really excited to bring on leadership and performance expert Phil Kornichuk on Super Athlete Radio today. Phil, how are you?
I'm doing great, Chase. What about yourself?
Doing fantastic. Really excited to have you on. I see you have two groups of people behind you. You want to share with us what these two different groups are?
Yeah, so the top pictures from a Stonewater expedition where we had, I think for that one, 7 different leaders really from around the nation come together. We're in Montana. We spent a week and we just went deep on, hey, what's our personal foundation? Who are the leaders we want to be and how do we get there? And what's really cool is actually talk to one of those people. He's a FBS head coach for football. Got a message from him this morning, and that event happened years and years ago right there. So it's really neat to watch the connections as they go forward. And then, over my left shoulder, probably the right as you're looking at it, that's my horde. I've got 8 kids. That's 7 of them in the picture, and my wife. And we just try to keep up with the masses at our house and sort of direct the energy to the best of our ability.
And then how many of the kids are still at home?
I've got 6 kids at home, 6 teenagers.
Okay.
So like every morning is like it's like a busy day in Syria. It is like game on. So
yeah, that's amazing. God bless. Well, before we get into all the cool stuff you're doing with Stonewater, I would love to hear a little bit about how you grew up, and then you had what looks like a very illustrious career in the United States military. Let's talk a little bit about how you grew up and then how you decided to go into the military.
Yeah, absolutely. And jump in if I hit on something that you have questions about. So bottom line, man, starting out the gate, I was not going anywhere fast. I was a high school dropout and pretty aimless. And I sort of stumbled into the Canadian Army on my 17th birthday. Didn't really know what else to do. Figured it was something. And it probably saved my life. It gave me structure and leadership. So what I had there was people who were like, yeah, we could care less about your backstory. Here's the standard. Now meet it. And if you don't feel like you meet it, we don't care. You still have to meet it because the military. And I realized when failure is not an option, I could do pretty good. And I liked how that success felt. So that was my first taste. But this is like the early 90s. And the U.S. Army had these commercials about people like doing wheelies on motorcycles at the backs of helicopters and paddling through swamps, probably in Florida. Under night vision, I'm like, man, that looks pretty cool. Because the Canadian Army had like 14 people and like 3 guns at that point. So as much as I loved the leadership, I wanted something, a little slicker. And I was like 18, 19, so a total victim of marketing. I came down, I joined the U.S. Army, a dual citizen. My mom's from Louisiana originally. And now, I began serving. Second Army I was in, I was 19 years old, and I kind of knew the ropes. And I was doing okay. I'd say I was an average performer. But I had these leaders that were like, hey, man, you got more to give. Like, you got more gas in the tank. You should become an officer. And I laughed. I'm like, I don't want to do paperwork and like, your job sucks. And then they showed me the pay scales. And I'm like, your job doesn't suck that bad. I could do some paperwork. And so I, keep in mind, as a high school dropout, now I'm going to Gonzaga University, great Jesuit school in Washington State, awesome basketball program, and I'm getting a degree to become an officer in the U.S. Army. So I come back in the Army, and I'm an officer, and expectations are higher. So, I go to Ranger School, serving in this great infantry unit. And once again, a leader kind of looks at me and goes, hey, man, you got more to give. You should try out for Ranger Regiment. So Ranger School is like training. Ranger Regiment is a collection of special operations folks. And so I'm like, I don't think I'm good enough to go there, right? That imposter syndrome was kicking. And this leader's like, yeah, you are. You just, you know what? The first step is to try. Go throw your name in the hat. Just give it your all. Just have no regrets. Whether you make it or not, it's a win. So I'm like, all right, he believes in me. Maybe I should listen to him. He's a smart guy. I respect him. So I went and I ended up getting selected for service in Ranger Regiment. So I served alongside, just for a frame of reference, this is now the early 2000s, Pat Tillman, the former Arizona Cardinals safety. He became a Ranger shortly after I did. So I was there, I think, a year, and he came in. exceptional leader and human being in his own right. But so is kind of that time frame, and that was the organization. So deployed 3 times with them. Is some pretty amazing experiences. Definitely being surrounded by people who performed at that level forced me to level up. But we, I'd done Iraq and done Afghanistan. Had some people get hurt pretty bad that I worked with, and at the same time, my wife had lost her mom while I was deployed and was pregnant with our firstborn. And it was one of those things where I'm like, hey, I'm gonna transition out and just try to support my family. I'd served in the military now, over 8 years, and I'm like, I'm gonna really try to be a present husband and father. So I got out, worked middle management for a Fortune 500 company, and I missed it. It was cool. I was able to work with it within a small team that I had and watch them elevate performance when I used the same leadership principles that I had in the military with this group, like high standards, strong support, know the person, make sure they understand their role in the mission, and then, let them rip. But I miss, I was losing friends overseas. I felt like, hey, what gives me the right to sit in an office when they're still over there doing hard things? And again, the politics of all the different conflicts aside, just the concept of this is what I did well and trained for, so let me go back in. So I went back in, and again, you'll start to see like I'm a total victim of marketing, and I'm very impressionable. Someone like, oh, Phil, good to see you back. Hey, you should be a Green Beret. And I'm like, good Lord, man. Like, how many times is this going to happen? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, no, seriously, man, just give it a shot. And they're like, if nothing else, the selection process is great. You'll learn a lot about yourself. Like we learn about ourselves when we're pushed to our limit, right? So I go to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and I get picked up. I become a Green Beret. I learn another language, I deploy a whole bunch more with an incredible team. Probably have some of my strongest leadership lessons, both wins and failures from that experience. And I like it. I'm like, okay, this is it. Here I am. Wow. I can look back at my career and say, job well done. And of course, someone else, another leader, General Scott Miller, he's retired now, but probably one of the top 3 leaders in my life. And not because he's this amazing tactical leader and an athlete and real smart. He's all those things. He's a leader who left a real impression on me because my dad, I've lost both my parents, but when my dad died and he found out, he was like at Starfleet level of the military. He's, at this point when my dad died, he was leading the counter ISIS campaign for all the SEALs, Rangers, Green Berets. Everyone was working for him, or all the specialized ones. And he calls me on a Saturday morning. He's like, oh my God, I just heard your dad died. I am so sorry. And he talked to me for like 30 minutes. And I was wondering to myself, hey, who's defending the free world if you're talking to me? But it was awesome. Like, it was just like, talk about a leader who could go from talking to a president one day and then talking to, at the time, I think I was a major on a Saturday morning, and just like, hey, are you okay? Anyways, so, but rewind, that guy said to me, hey, you got more to give. He encouraged me to try out for another elite organization. And I was like, you guys are nuts, but okay, I'll give it a shot. Like, if you think it, fine. I'm starting to read the tea leaves. And that's where I spent, another 7 years working with just amazing top performers from across all the services. And then I retired in 2019, started doing leadership development. I realized, thanks to some other friends who are athletes, that the lessons I learned in the military could apply to sports teams, could apply to businesses, could apply to nonprofits, to people just trying to figure out their own lives and lead themselves. That this same lessons where I've been cutting my teeth, overseas in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Philippines, Africa, and seeing incredible wins and incredible losses, that to let that legacy just lie at the end of my military career is a waste. So I poured it into first a company called Lead 406, and then we moved to Pacific Northwest. That company was purchased by a different group, and then started Stonewater Training, and have been doing that since then. But first and foremost, trying to just apply those lessons every day myself in my life, because rent is due every day, as I'm sure you and your athletes know.
That's amazing. Okay, so I'd like to go back here. I took some notes here on what you're saying. What an extraordinary story, and I'm sure you're an exemplar in terms of the leadership stuff that you're talking about. But when you joined the Canadian military, you said you did very well when you were forced. Failure was not an option. Could you talk about that a little bit? And then potentially, is that something that you think could be benefit people in a larger context?
Yeah, absolutely. So I keep in mind, as a high school dropout, I had no ambition, no focus, no clarity. And I kind of stumbled in this environment where none of that mattered to my leaders. So I didn't know what I was potential of. I never held myself to high standards. I was a mediocre hockey player in high school till I was like a sophomore. And like I said, I dropped out of high school. So I didn't have that framework for high performance. And I was like a blank sheet. And they were basically like, yeah, you you must, this is the standard, you have to do it to pass. And I wanted to pass. I learned actually also really quickly too that the easiest way to get through something hard is to do it well. Like just learn the fundamentals and execute with intensity, and it's a whole lot better than if you try to shortcut or avoid. Um, and so these people basically didn't take no for an answer. And keep in mind, like I was very junior level. If you take that same approach and try to force a top performer or an elite performer, it's going to have a perverse effect because they're usually intrinsically motivated. But for that person, you get someone who's played video games for the first 23 years of their life, and they come into your workplace, and they're a blank sheet to go like, hey, this is who we are. This is our culture. We brought you on board because we think you're part of it. Here's the standards. Like, you got this. And oh, by the way, like, you better get this. You don't see a lot of accountability in a healthy way, I think, in many organizations today. But the ones that do it and do it well, and they're like, look, this isn't just for us. This is for you as well. I think it's powerful. It's that concept of, who is it? One of the conquistadors or whatever, he burns his boats when he lands. Like, hey, there's no going back to the old country. Yeah, Cortez. It's like, this is it. And I think there was some other legal, moral, and ethical issues going on there. But the concept, I think, is powerful of when retreat's not an option, when failure's not an option, we can accomplish some pretty amazing things.
And then what would you say is the right way to hold people accountable?
Yeah, I think first off, it's clear communication. So know the person, know what they're capable of, ensure there's alignment and values, and then making sure that the standards are clearly communicated, and don't be moving the goalposts all around on them without them knowing, because that gets real frustrating. If I achieve what was success yesterday, but you're like, no, today's different, but you didn't tell me, then I'm like, come on, give me a break, Chase. But when you can clearly articulate, like, this is the standard, this is why this matters, I think at that point you have a strong vehicle for focused, elevating performance.
And then the military across all divisions is known for leadership, but I feel like the Rangers specifically, um, potentially, correct me if I'm wrong here, put a little bit more emphasis on that. Could you maybe tell me if that's accurate? And if so, how do they, within the Ranger Regiment, how is leadership kind of emphasized?
Yeah, I think leadership is definitely a focus of the military as a whole, and they have some great material and tons of research on it, right? And they get to see what leadership looks like when it plays out in the highest stake environments where life and death is on the line. I think within special operations, you see an elevated expectation for leaders. I know I certainly felt that. One thing I thought Rangers did really well and still do really well is they have, to my earlier point, they have very clearly established standards of what's tolerated, what's not, what the expectations are. And actually, the guy who won best, one of the athletes and officers who won best ranger last year or this year, Captain Luke Ebeling, he was someone I've been working with for several years. Instead of watching, he was actually an ordnance officer, so not even a combat arms guy. And he goes and he wins basically the Super Bowl of military special operations. He says his partner carried him, but they probably carried each other at the right time. But he's a product of that environment, and he could speak to it in today's day and age better than me. But I just remember there being the Ranger standards and the Ranger creed, like that was, you eat, sleep, and breathe that every time, and you constantly reinforced it to each other. And as a leader, you were expected to model that in all ways. I'd say more, yeah, probably more so than any other organization I was part of. Because when I was a Green Beret, and then other teams, there was still a high expectation of leadership, but it's usually much more dynamic, fuzzy environment. So I tell people, like, Rangers, you got a good, consistent product. I go in some of the other special operations where you had more latitude. you could get really, really good, or you could get really, really bad if someone kind of went off the rails the wrong direction, because there wasn't as many checks and balances. Rangers, they had the guardrails up, they had the standards communicated, and it was a great vehicle for taking 18 to 22-year-olds and forging them into high performing leaders, whether you want to or not. Because I saw that happen over and over. I loved it.
Forge them into high performing leaders. I love that. And then I love when you say when you're doing something really hard, it's the best way to do it. It turns out the easiest way is to just do it as hard as you can, and then and with intensity. It makes me think of, like, they looked at people who said they didn't like doing math, and they did brain scans of them, and then the pain was always like before the task itself. Like the pain centers in their brain would light up when they would think about math, but when they were actually doing the task, the pain wasn't there.
It's funny you say that, and it's very timely. So we have an atmospheric river coming through Oregon right now. So, which basically is a fancy way of saying it's raining a lot. And so this morning, I had a trail run late on, and both me and my dog are just, it's in the dark. You're just watching sheets of rain come out, and he doesn't want to go, and I don't want to go. And I'm like, come on, man, you're going to go on this podcast, talk about being mentally tough, and you're sitting here scared of a few raindrops. Now, it was like northwest sheets of rain. And I'm like, you know what? Whatever, just do it. And I stepped out the door, and it's that first step is the hardest one. Once you break the doorway and you're in, you get wet, you're running, and it's like, you know what? It's not just I can do this, but you start embracing it. The mud, the rain, the wind. You're like, hell yeah, this is a run. This is a run. I'll remember it. Now, my dog had he was just like, Dad, you're crazy. But anyways, it's all about that first step, and to sit there and to cut the run short or go a different route. It's like, no, just go all in, commit and execute.
I love that. And then when you were talking about your story at the start, you dropped in some, I think, leadership you said you learned in one of the second or third groups of high standards, know the mission, and then there was a couple other things in let it rip. What were those?
Yeah. Oh man.
You dropped it. You dropped it.
Rewind this. I'm like, yeah, I kind of was in flow state and lost it for a minute there. No, I think, for a high performing organization is there's clarity and alignment on the mission. So it's like, we understand why we're here. Then there's a strong culture where people know why we do what we do. We understand the values, what we hire and fire for, or what is critical to success, or the absence thereof leads to failure. That's how I look at organizational values. And then we clearly know priorities, meaning, hey, I have limited time and resources, but if I'm in this position on a team and I have X amount of time, I know I'm focused on this. This is where I'm going to pour in. I think when you have clarity on mission, you have a strong culture, and then, oh gosh, what else did I say, Chase? Hopefully you remember.
I have, you got to let it rip at the end. What
okay.
you do?
Yeah, and then it's execute with intensity, right? And then and we can get one when you talk, when I break down, like, hey, what are actual leadership skills? A lot of it, what applies to the individual applies to the organization.
I love that. And then with what you're doing now at Stonewater, one of the things you're doing is executive coaching. These are already high performers. Why do you feel like having a coach is beneficial to people at a high level, whether that's in business or athletics or in the military? Why do you feel like it's important for, really high level people to have people pushing them?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it continues to foster that elevating performance, right? That peak performance, it gets better. And, I think how it does that is you're getting different perspective. So it's someone outside their objective, and they're not judging. It's a different perspective. And they're going to ask questions. Why do you do things that way, Chase? Why does that resonate with you? And it's forcing you to kind of go into yourself and go, that's a great question. And so there's the perspective piece. There's kind of that peeling back the layers and asking the questions that we sometimes take for granted within ourselves. And I think one of the most powerful things I see is the accountability aspect of coaching. Meaning, I'll work with clients who they understand their business. They don't need any business expertise from Phil. God help them if they did. But what they'll be framing out, strategic roadmap or a plan or how they're going to handle a leadership challenge. And I'm listening and I'm taking notes and I'm asking questions and they're really refining that vision. And then, we'll reconnect in a week or two and they'll be like, all right, so how did it go? I'll be like, how did what go? Well, you mapped this out. You're going to have this tough conversation. Here's your points, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, it didn't go. Now, the thing is, the folks I work with, the people I'm coaching, that's one of the last things is, hey, how do I help make sure this really happens? You say it's important. It's not me. You said this is important. You mapped out a great plan. What can I do to make sure this happens and happens with excellence? And even if it goes poorly, how do we unpack, refine, adjust, and execute? And so, yeah, I text and call a lot of people during the week and we work through stuff. But that accountability, that simple execution, that just taking the step makes all the difference. Even when it's the wrong step, you're like, oh, okay, that did not work. Let's pivot.
Because at least you're closing that loop of what you said was important, and then based off whatever happens, then you can do the next.
Exactly.
The next thing.
Versus it stays in the world or the realm of wishes. Oh, I wish I could have that tough conversation. I wish I could try for that new position. It's like, hey, wishes, that's just air. Let's put some rubber, have the rubber meet the road.
And then I saw a great quote of yours on LinkedIn on, it wasn't how you define coaching, but that's kind of what I took away from it. So how do you define coaching in your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's eliciting peak performance out of an individual in any given field. So that could be physical, technical, leadership, and it's done through a variety of means, based on who the coach is, and as well as the coachee. It can be directive if someone's like, I don't have any direction. I'm a blank sheet. Like some people, they want that. I like more of a questioning sort of Socratic method to it. Or it can be modeling the way. I've had people are like, hey, I want to do what you did. I want to, adopt your style. And I always am like, well, that's what you think my style is. If you saw me at like 4 p.m. when the kids come home, you'd be like, I don't want that leadership style. So to me, you define success in coaching when an individual or an organization is transformed, when they are different for the result. If I am coaching with someone or training with someone and they're the same 6 months after we began, no, change is gradual and meaningful change and process is slow. It's not an overnight thing. But if they see the world the same way, if they're executing at the same standards, if nothing's changed, then to me, I'm like, we're kind of missing the mark here. And maybe I'm not the right person for them. Maybe we need to pivot, but I think coaching is about transformation and change.
I love that. And then I want to do a quick shift here. I was reading an article in Journal on Strength and Conditioning this morning about, it was, the benefits was like high intensity functional training for military personnel or something like that. But the reason I bring it up is like, so when I think about the benefits of physical training, like what do you train for in terms of to being able to prepare for the military for battle? I feel like the most important thing is to be able to train a variety of different skills and to be able to go as long as possible without knowing when the end is going to be.
Yeah.
And that seems like that's just as much mental as it is physical. And I'm a big fan of, there's always going to be uncertainty in life. So when your experience doing all these in all these different special operation regimens, how did you deal with the uncertainty of, okay, how long is this going to go, or am I going to make it out here? Or what are some maybe tools that you had in your mental toolkit that helped you get through that and conquer that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I deployed the combat 12 times. I was in the service for 22 years, actually, in 2 different services for about 24 years. And if you had asked me this about 10 years ago, I'd be like, oh no, just do it. But now I sort of look back at it with a little more reflection. I think one of the biggest things to handle that ambiguity, handle that stress is first off, practice it, right? How do I put myself in a condition where it's a engineered or intentional adversity, and just practice that feeling of, oh, I'm not in control here. And how do I handle, that ambiguity, that like, I don't know what to expect. So I think that's one, is just exercise it, which, physically there's so many ways to do that. But then I also think there's the mental piece. I really embrace mindfulness and breath work as a way to fully center up and be present and kind of connect to like, hey, what is the optimal performing Phil Kornichuk? But I think the ability to be fully present, when you think about what stresses people out, what erodes their mental strength, a lot of times they're fixating on past mistakes in an unhealthy manner, and they just can't get it out of their head. Like, oh, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I missed the kick. I can't believe I got choked out like in the first 4 seconds of that. Whatever it is, and they just can't shift from problem centric thinking to that solution focus. Now, I'm not saying la di da, everything's great all the time, and you got this Pollyannish approach to life. But I think when you fixate on the past, that totally crushes you for the present. When you define yourself by your failures, conversely, I think the majority of people don't do hard things because they make it bigger in their head than it really is. So they're thinking about some future thing that they kind of want to do. So for me, it was like, hey, try out to be a Green Beret. I'm like, I have no right doing that. As a matter of fact, my biggest regrets are things that I made bigger in my mind and I never tried. And then I found out later, like, that wasn't that big at all. So this anxiety, this stress about the unknown, the future, like, oh, what if she says this? What if he does that? What if it doesn't work? What if the market tanks? What if the what if monster? It's like, you know what? Like, what if? So what? Like, this is life. It's full of challenge. It's full of risk. It's full of unknown reward. Be fully present. So I'll tell folks, I'm like, hey, you can't go back and relive the past, but you can learn from it. So like, yeah, absolutely acknowledge mistakes, own them, but then go, so what's different? What did I learn from that? Conversely, you cannot predict the future. If you can, please let me know. I would love to meet you. But you can't predict the future, but you can plan for it. So make a realistic plan. Think about your contingencies. But what you really have is right now, right? There's that saying, it's a little corny, but I like it. It's like, it's called the present because it's a gift. It's what we actually have in control. My thoughts, my words, my actions, December 5th at 10:43 a.m. on the West Coast. Like, I have control over that. I can't control what's happening this afternoon, but I've got this now. So I think that gives you enormous mental strength. You're like, hey, wait a second. Is this bad? This 3-month training program I'm going through that everyone says sucks? Is it this bad? Or no, I'm dry. I'm alive. I'm going to have a little bit of food. I just got to take this next step. Like, that's not so bad. When I think of it in the enormity, oh my God, I could never do that. So.
Yeah, and it goes kind of with what we were talking about before we went live about my older son who was at a basketball tournament where you are in Lake Oswego, and then you said you have a daughter who they overthink, and in doing that, they're not fully present, which impacts the quality of their performance in the present, which of course is like a loop because it goes back to what they didn't want in the first place because they're not performing to the standard that they wanted to perform at.
Yeah, it's that whole expectancy theory, right? Like what you focus on expands. So if you think about your past failures, about how hard something's going to be, it probably gets worse. But if you fixate on like, past successes or what you need to do in the moment, you're typically going to do better.
And then you mentioned things like breath work, and of course, being in the military for so long, physical training has been a huge part of your life. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how that can potentially benefit people in business and or people who are not having to use their bodies as a tool in terms of, do you feel like there's benefit in them still getting in peak physical condition in terms of doing stuff like breath work, in terms of doing stuff like hot and cold therapy and things like that?
Yeah, I think absolutely on multiple levels. Like first off, there's some direct correlation between when you are physically healthy, you're cognitively more healthy, your stress tolerance is much higher, your ability to make decisions elevates. Like, body's a machine. When it's running well, it typically, the brain part's going to work better too. So just from that aspect of live long and be more functional, I think fitness has a place, right? Base level, like just do something for 30 minutes a day. The next piece, I think, though, is when you go a level up, you built the habit of movement, you're getting a little healthier, eating a little cleaner. I think the next level up is discipline yourself to do hard things. Like get used to not shying away from adversity, but from tackling it head on in a healthy fashion. And just go, coming to that realization that, oh, I can push my limits. I can do hard things. I can set a goal. My wife's notorious for this. She'll sign me up for these crazy races. I don't like running, but she'll sign me up for some trail half marathon or whatever at a ski resort. And I'm like, ugh, okay, now I have to run with purpose and do it. After, I always feel great. Before, I'm just kind of like, okay, so I'm forcing myself to do something that is good for me, but it's not my default setting. And I think, to do that physically is the most tangible way to practice it, which then translates to, okay, what am I doing mentally? What am I reading? Am I just scrolling through social media, or am I spending that time to try to make myself a better parent, a better partner, a better friend, a better athlete? Um, and you're building that muscle of, I don't instantly pursue comfort and ease. I can push myself to do hard things. That's probably honestly the primary reason I do cold plunges. I think there's some physiological recovery elements to it as well, and there's lots of papers written about it, and people love to debate it. But they're like, why do you do it, Phil? I go, because I don't like it. Like, because to make myself sit there for 3 to 7 minutes, and I'll do my breath work and my mindfulness practice in it. I'm like, if I can do it in that artificially uncomfortable environment, or I guess it's really uncomfortable, but I'm putting myself in it by choice. Then when I have a truly stressful situation, it's a lot easier because I practice it in miserable conditions. It's a lot easier for me to call up, like, okay, quick breath, center on purpose and values. Who is the person that I want to be in this moment? So that's where I draw a lot of value. So I have a morning routine I go through the vast majority of mornings. Every now and again I skip it, and I just, the whole day I feel like I'm missing a key component of my day. But for me, it kind of centers up the day, and it incorporates breathing, moving, doing hard things, focusing on who I want to be, and then what it looks like in the day.
I love that. Yeah, I recorded a mini episode earlier on Super Athlete Radio, and one of the things I was talking about was this book I just read by a therapist named Phil Stutz called Lessons for Living. And he talked about how there's 3 different types of discipline. There's structural discipline, which is kind of what you're talking about in terms of like the morning routine and like what you do throughout day in and day out. Reactive discipline in terms of how we respond to shit that happens or people that do stuff to us. And then expansive discipline, which is where we go exactly what you're saying in terms of doing hard things and going searching for doing that trail run in the snow or searching for new ways to grow physically or mentally. And he said all 3 of these things need to be cultivated because the brain doesn't want to do it, in terms of baseline. And then why do you feel like there's a gap between the business community and understanding that the better they are in shape physically, the more mentally they're able to perform? Does it like fear of missing out that I could be spending that time working, or just it hasn't been communicated in education? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I guess I've got a few different ones. First off, like, I work with some really kind of purpose-driven, value-based leaders who are extremely successful at business and totally get what we're talking about now. Like, they start their day physically, they move their body, they exercise their mind, they focus on their higher self. And conversely, it pays out. Like, then you watch those same practices, those same disciplines roll right on over into who they are as a business leader. And they're not focused. When I work with teams, I'm like, don't focus on the scoreboard, focus on the process. It's not the 2 hours on the football field. It's what you're doing the rest of the week that really plays out. And so I've watched business leaders who do embrace that mindset and do extremely well. When I work with ones who recognize the need for it but have not incorporated it in their life, I welcome them to the human race, because they're just like all of us. Like, I don't do what I know I should do. And the most typical obstacle I hear is time. I don't have time to go to the gym. I travel a lot. I this, I that. And that's where usually in a coaching session, I'm like, all right, let's do 2 minutes of coaching session. Let's do 2 minutes of burpees. And they're like, what? Oh yeah, come on, let's do it. Now, I actually, all my in-person coaching, I do outside. Like, we'll be paddleboarding or go for a trail run or a walk. And but for my remote clients, I'm like, oh, no problem. Like, you agree fitness is important. Time's a challenge. Like, 2 minutes. That's all I'm asking for. And 2 minutes of burpees will have me like hyperventilating. I'm talking to the wizard. Like, it's a bad place. And of course they realize, oh, it's not time. It's, hey, after you brush your teeth and while your coffee is brewing, I want you to do this full body flow. Do a couple push-ups, a couple sit-ups, a couple squats. Guess what? If the rest of the day goes to heck, at least you practice that. And what's funny is that rapidly habit stacks. So time is a big barrier. And I think there are some folks who they just they truly don't see the value. They're like, well, that's not what I do. I do real estate. I'm not an athlete. Why would I waste my time doing it? And for them, I think it's more education. Like, here's why. Um, and some will choose to get it, and some won't. I feel like a lot of high performing leaders over time do get it. I really do. At least to some
Yeah,
degree, they've
I
got
agree.
some hack.
Yeah. And then I want to touch a little bit on what your thoughts are on stress. Do you feel like stress is positive, neutral, or negative?
Yes, all of the above. So I think probably not neutral. I'd say it's typically positive or negative. So I think, to me it's stress is it's kind of that pressure, right? Whether it's physical, mental, emotional, and I think that tension can be good or bad, and it depends a lot of times the root cause. So for example, if you're stressed because you're fixating on a past mistake and you can't let it go, and you're sleeping like crap because you're like, and you're fixated, that is bad stress. I'm sorry, there's no way about it. That's totally useless. That's a waste. If you're stressing about something in the future and you're just, again, same thing, can't sleep at night, fixated on it, you're totally anxious, nervous, that's unhealthy stress. Now if you're going, ooh, this could be a challenge, and you're taking proactive measures to prepare for it, and they're constructive, like, okay, well, if this happens, here's what I'll say. If that happens, that's what I'll do. I think that can be healthy. You're actually building options. So the stress is a driver for opening your window up. Same with that negative stress of focusing on past mistake. If you're looking at that going, okay, how do I get better from that failing? Then that's healthy stress. I think, I think stress adaptation is one of the primary drivers of growth, whether it's physically, mentally, spiritually, socially. So whether it's funny, people will go to the gym, they'll push themselves hard, they'll read deep books, they'll sign up for challenging courses, and then when life punches them in the face, when something hard happens, they're like, oh, this is BS. And I'm like, oh, hold on a minute, life just gave you a golden opportunity to exercise adversity. Now you get to practice all that stuff. uh you trained, this is the time when it really matters. And when people can shift that mindset and go, okay, I was hunting out adversity, sort of that type 3 you were talking about earlier, where people are looking for um, discipline, like they're seeking out hard things. You do that. So then when you have to react to it, when it's something you didn't choose, it's the same muscles, call it forward. I mean, it's a lot of the business model of what I do, especially of the more experiences and expeditions, where I'll bring different leaders kind of together for maybe 2 days or 6 days of all different stuff. They don't know the itinerary, they don't know exactly what we're doing, and there's a lot of stress of the unknown. And what's great is, as they learn to let go and just be in the moment, they're practicing that same muscle. We have to keep going back and re-educating them, like, hey, when you go back to your real estate office, when you go back to your tech company, like, it's the same. Like, there's unknown stuff, there's pitfalls, there's challenges, there's opportunities. It's the same mental muscles that we're practicing here that you do there. So I think that's a really healthy stress when you seek it out and practice it. But it's no different than, in real adversity, like if you can view it as an opportunity for learning and growth. And it hurts real bad sometimes. Like I said, I've lost several friends, and to me it's like, how do I carry that legacy forward? So
Yeah. And then a lot of times the stress, we think like a lot of people have like a aura ring for like checking their heart rate variability, which is great, a fantastic indicator of stress. But a lot of people associate that just with, did I overtrain physically or something yesterday, right? But in my experience, and I've looked at a lot of these, most of the time it's going to be something outside of the physical training that's going to determine how much stress that you're under. And it really is just a powerful mental game in terms of being able to consistently apply all the stuff that we're learning about. I love the connection you made of like, yeah, you train yourself physically all the time and you read all these books. So it's like, okay, now it's time to actually apply that. I think that's really beautiful. It sounds like you had some amazing leaders and role models when you were in the military. What were some of the things that they communicated in terms of staying calm under pressure and how to deal with stress and how to make the right decision when, bullets are flying around you? Is there anything that stands out there?
Yeah, I think, that old, I think it was a Roman saying, sweat and training, prevents blood in battle or saves blood in battle. Like or train like you fight. So if you can train and practice, whether it's mental, physical, technical for certain athletes, practicing conditions that are harder than you expect to encounter on game day or when it's time to close a deal or that really challenging boardroom meeting, then when you step into that organic adversity that life throws your way, you're like, oh, this isn't as bad. I remember thinking that in combat on multiple occasions, like, this is bad, but we trained harder than this. Like, this is like a training event. It's just higher stakes. And you just had a level of calm because you're like, I know what to do. So that's one piece is, train harder in your fight. I think a second one is once you're in the fight, once you're in that stressful situation, it's too late for you to go back and go, why do I do this? And what's really important? And how do I make decisions? So I really hammer on folks. We're actually rolling out like online course for this in January from Stonewater, but hey, how to develop your personal foundation, meaning when I clearly know, hey, my purpose, when I clearly know my values, my roles, my goals, my priorities, when I have that and it's encoded in me, then when I get into a really bad situation and I'm thrown for a loop and I go, wait a sec, why am I on this side of the grass? What's this all about? And I can go, okay, hey, Phil, you connect and inspire, you do good and you push your limits. And I'm like, okay, got it. This is hard, but it's an opportunity to push my limits. Like, let's go. And when I know my values, hey, faith, integrity, discipline, love, evolution, courage, like what does that look like in this situation? Well, you can call that up. I am very like people will say like what happened? You just totally changed how you spoke, how you moved, how you act. And I'm like, oh, I reminded myself of who I wanted to be in this moment. And it's funny. I was sharing with a group last week. So probably my hairiest day in combat, it was April 6, 2010 in northwestern Afghanistan. Recon patrol just getting blown apart, totally surrounded, pinned down. Like it was bad. And I remember taking a knee, and I had several, wounded, laid out in front of me. I took a knee. I was behind a mud wall, and I pulled out this little laminated cheat sheet book I had because my brain was in sensory overload. Both my radios are going off. There's explosions. I'm shooting. I'm being shot at. Grenades are flying over a wall. Wounded are screaming. Blood's pouring on my knee. Like it's all that happening. And I just took a breath and I started reading. Okay, what did I tell myself I'd do when I had a mass casualty situation? What did I tell myself I'd do if I couldn't get air support? And all of a sudden, as this calm came over, and I just started literally it's like a Mad Libs, like I was filling in the blanks on these radio calls, and I started quickly asserting control where I could. And I remember the feedback after where people are like, "How did you stay that calm in that situation?" I'm like, "Oh, I wasn't." I go, but then when I took a knee, took a breath, looked at my playbook, and just executed. I didn't stress about what might happen. I just said what must happen. So when I started doing that, I go, there's clarity. And of course, once I started doing that, things began getting better. And what ended up being a really, really rough day ended up being like a pivotal day for that region for years.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I love that because it makes, by having these values, consistently bringing them up, it does seems like it's decision fatigue. Like now I know how I'm supposed to show up. Yep. Right? So you don't have to think about like what's the right move. Now I know. I think that's absolutely amazing. And then is this something that by now you just have memorized in your head, or do you write them down every morning, or what's kind of your practice to keep them in the forefront?
So I've got them written down. I'll review them periodically. What I love about my job is I work with tons of people on this. So like I'll be working through a personal mastery course with them. And even this morning, someone was like, "How do you define your values and principles?" I shared it with them. So I professionally get to practice it, but it's part of my morning routine where I'll be sitting in that cold plunge. I do my focused breathing and I'll, go through what's my purpose and what's that look like today on December 5th. Okay. What are my values? What's that look like today, December 5th? So I'm basically playing, I'm visualizing the day in accordance with my purpose, values, my best self. So that if today's my last day, and it could be, I don't know, that I can walk off this earth going, yep, that's who I want to be. That's how I want my story to end. The challenge is when you get in a triggered moment, when it's emotional, when it's scary, stressful, angry, someone disrespects you, right? and that limbic system, your emotional driver, just hijacks your higher level you, is, hey, how do I check that raging bull self and then bring together my higher level me, which I'll do through like kind of 2 deep inhales, and then I'll just be like, all right, purpose, values, and it's okay. This is how I approach this situation. You can't disrespect me because I have to give you that permission to. So you can say whatever you want. If you're right, I'll fix it. If you're wrong, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry you feel that way. And it's an absolute game changer. And people will comment, they're like, dude, what happened? How did you, like, I saw your veins popping out of your neck, and then all of a sudden you just were like zenned out and totally calm.
Yeah, because it's like the ego wants you to think like, oh, if I respond this way, then I'm a punk. But after you do it, you realize like you feel powerful because you realize that you overcame the ego.
Yeah, you took the higher road, checked yourself.
You took the higher road, exactly, and that of course is the more challenging road when the emotion and the ego wants to react in a certain way.
Yeah.
Based off what you just said, I'd love to hear when things are at their worst, how can you still perform at your best? And the reason I ask you this now is because I'm guessing one of the things you do is go back to value system and have that in your mind. But is there any tools that you feel can help people when this is something that I talk about consistently? We have a lot of sports scientists and on the show, and we talk about like there's these 2 lines, they're parallel lines going up. Like the bottom line is we want to consistently be working on improving our sleep quality, and we want to consistently be working on our nutrition and our mindset and things like that. And then the top line is no matter what the fuck happens down here, we want to just consistently perform at a really high level. And the example that we like to use is I had Clive Brewer on, who's turned out to be a friend of mine, but whatever team he's been on, whether it's the Toronto Blue Jays or MLS teams, they've always made the playoffs. But when he was with the Blue Jays, like the pitchers would like, sometimes they'd come into the room where he was before the night they had to pitch, and they're like, hey, Clive, my Oura Ring score was like 40 last night, like horrible. You think I should pitch tonight? And like they're joking, like, hey, I'm going to go out and crush it anyway.
Yeah.
You know? So I was wondering if you have any thoughts beyond kind of values of like what people can do no matter what's going on around them to still be able to perform at a high level.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to that concept of when failure is not an option. Like focus on what you must do to have overwhelming success. Like, hey, it doesn't matter if I haven't slept in 3 days. It doesn't matter if I'm hungry, if I'm tired, if I've got a broken bone. Like I have to execute. Like failure is not an option, and it's all in. And you realize, especially in relatively short term, your mind can overpower whatever your body's going through. I mean, I've seen people do things that I'm like, he had a crushed vertebrae, but I saw him get up, run, and tackle a person. And like literally, I've watched adrenaline dumps and different things happen where people would have their best performance when physically their hardware was in a pretty deteriorated condition. So I think just remembering that, like, hey, there's a country song. I think it's I'm good. I'm as good once as I ever was. Meaning, like, for one short burst, I can be pretty flippin' awesome. And I talk about it being a short term thing. But I reflect even on like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He writes about his experience in the death camps. And I mean, he literally gets mentally stronger throughout that experience. So he literally comes out and writes a book in 9 days after like insane physical, mental, spiritual, all this crazy pain. So I think when we put it in perspective and go, wait a second, so you got 40 on your Oura Ring, so you had a lousy night sleeping, so you made some mistakes, you got a bit of a hangover. Who cares? Life doesn't care. Like, show up, give it, send it.
I love that. And then I'd like to talk about what you're doing with Stonewater and the events/excursions that you have. Why do you decide to do those out in tough terrain in nature?
Yeah, I think, well, there's several levels. There's some great research on just the impact of nature on our mental and physical health. Even as simple as I was reading an article this morning about, in dense urban areas, working by a window versus working somewhere where you don't see natural light. Like there's enormous benefits to just being outside. So I think that's a great baseline. But what I also love is just the degree of perspective you get when you're out in nature, right? Like our problems, our successes, our losses all seem so big until like you're in the middle of Montana and you're looking at a sky just exploding, night sky just exploding with stars. You're miles from the nearest road, and all of a sudden you realize, man, I am so small and insignificant, but I'm also kind of, this is everything. This is my world. And you just get a sense of perspective that I think puts things in order that is hard to get in a hotel conference room. Uh, I just think that awe and that realization of, to me, there's so many metaphors in nature. I love using like rivers and water because they're immensely powerful, and you can fight them or you can learn how to use them. And it's one of that things like life could care less what choice you make, but it's on you. You can harness this power and excel, or you can fight it, exhaust yourself, and lose. Mountains to me are the same thing. I talk about your purpose. That's the peak we're going for. Your values, that's the route we're going to take. You're welcome to deviate and just choose your own route, but you're never going to get to where you want to go. And most people will just sit around the base of the mountain around a fire and talk about what it'd be like if they climbed it. I go, you do it. Even if you slide, you fall, you stumble, it's hard, you're exhausted, you want to quit. Every time you take a step up, you're moving the right direction. And I love that metaphor and power in it. So, plus I like being outside. It's totally selfish hack there, but
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. You talked about how you had the gentleman who just got the job with the big time football job. You said he did the event a few years ago, and he's still reached out to you, connected to you and other members in the cohort. Why do you think that is? Do you think just
yeah,
bonding in that challenging
I think it
environment?
is. Yeah, I think shared experience. So right, it's a couple of things. I don't remember my easy days, right? When everything went swimmingly, it just kind of fades into gray. But I remember the hard days where I had to dig deep, push hard. Maybe it was something I was nervous about or challenged by. Like those are the days I remember. So we'll bring people out. There'll be a lot of ambiguity about what exactly we're doing. We take care of everything for them with respect to guides, equipment, gear, all that. We just say, show up, have this many socks, this many underpants. We'll take it from there. Um, so there's high levels of anxiety, apprehension. People are nervous, and then they start connecting with other people who are nervous. So you get that shared experience of like, they're all like, what are we doing? What did we sign up for? And then you couple that with, they're going to push themselves, usually physically. There's, depending on where their fitness level is, it may be challenging, it may not, but it's usually unique. And they're working together, they're pushing their limits, and then they're having these intentional times to reflect and discuss. And the conversations aren't like, oh, what do you do? What's that like? They're deep. Like, why are you? And what matters to you? And tell me about your funeral. Like they're like powerful conversations. And you just can't talk to people like that for 2 to 5 days when you're in an emotionally and physically depleted state and not get really close to them. I had we got a program coming up in February, and I think I was sharing with you before we went live. Like it's it's challenging, right? It's cold, it's wet. There's even the city, Portland, a lot of folks, that's a challenge for some of them. It's going through a transitional state. Um, but the group I had last year, I met them about a month ago, and I just intended to meet one of them, and then like four of them showed up to the place we were at, and then two of them who weren't there were talking about their business venture they're running with two other people. Make it a year later. There was no structured contact maintained, but they were all really tightly aligned, and they're spread everywhere from the Carolinas to down in California. I got a Canadian guy who's tied into another guy from Arkansas from one of these experiences. And I love it. To me, that's like, whether I live another 50 years or today's my last day, when I'm like, man, I was able to be a small part of that connection, that elevation. I'm like, that's a life well lived right there.
Yeah, when we look at looking at biomarkers and things for longevity, we talk about the cold plunges and the stem cells and the peptides and all that stuff, but our ability to handle stress is the biggest accelerator, and then also our connections that we have with other people is just, I mean, it's just as important as all this stuff, if not more important. Like when you look at the actual data, it's really incredible in terms of how
I think
powerful.
that's one of the biggest indicators is that human connection piece, that deep bonds. Yeah. Which I love because it just is a natural byproduct of what we do. I'm trying to help people exercise a higher level of leadership, and a common trend I'll hear is people are lonely. They're like, yeah, I'm a CFO, I'm a COO, I'm a CEO. Like, I don't always get honest. I don't get direct people. It's a different connection. Like there's power dynamics and things in play. Like, so I don't form those same connections. But when I come out as a leader and I work with these other leaders who have similar challenges, and we have these hard, deep conversations, it really accelerates the growth.
Mm. And then you mentioned you have 8 kids, and what are, let's say, 3 things that you believe would be beneficial for kids to be taught in the modern environment, whether they're getting taught that now or maybe something that needs to be emphasized more coming from their parents?
Yeah, man, if I had this really figured out, I'd probably be a way better dad, but I'll take a swing at it. I think heavy focus on the process, not the product, right? It's not about the trophy, it's not about the win, it's about did you show up? Did you do your best? More importantly, were you practicing, preparing? Were you intentional, deliberate? Which when you're working with kids and their brains are still forming, it's hard to encode that. Kind of crazy when it does stick. I worked with a few younger athletes and performers and leaders who locked it in. Now they're in their mid-20s. They're going to rule the world like probably in a year or two. But and that guy who won Best Ranger was someone I've been working with since he was pretty young. Well, I mean he was like 20 maybe when I first touched base with them. But yeah, so number one is just doing the work, trust the process. Like athlete, academic, life, like building those consistent habits of excellence. Second is just understanding the impact of the people around you. You become the 5 people you hang around with. And this, we're talking about kids, but really this could apply to anyone. Like I'm 49 and I need to practice all these things. Just be cognizant of surround yourself with people who are who you want to become. And it's going to shape you, right? We're the average of the 5 people we hang around with the most. It's why I act like I'm 18 because I'm surrounded by teenagers. We like to think of ourselves as an island and we get our own personality and drives, but I think people really impact us. And then the third is similar to the second bullet is that your environment shapes you, meaning, our house, we've got pull up bar in the door frame. There's a recurve bow in the backyard and a target set up. We've got a garage. Like there's just stuff everywhere. And I'll watch my kids just in their natural flow, like always are doing something. And I love it because they don't think of it as, oh, I'm working out or I'm exercising. They're just kind of like, well, I'm bored. So, I did this or I did that. And it's super cool to watch just how your environment impacts you. When we lived in Montana, I loved it there because like they would ski with school. They would learn to tie flies. They were always doing something. And it didn't even register that was unusual. We moved to a more urban environment here and they're like, oh, so not everyone's tying flies like in their outdoor club in school or doing this or doing that. Now they're into other stuff here, which is still really cool. But yeah, your environment shapes you. So,
So you said focus on process over outcome. Be conscious of the people that surround you. And I love this because this is applied for adults just as much as kids. And your environment shapes you. So set yourself up in terms of set yourself up for success in terms of your environment around you. That's so good. This has been amazing, Phil. Real quick, I'd like to wrap up with some rapid fire questions here, then we'll let you get on with your day. You already mentioned a couple. Biggest mentor in your life?
Single biggest mentor. There's a couple. I'll say Scott Miller is a big one, so let's stick with him. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he's pretty well known, right? I feel like I've heard that name before.
Yeah, he's got some pretty interesting stories. So especially in the special operations community, he's been around for a while, and he's a civilian now. Running an organization called Prairie Fire down in Nevada, which is all about leadership and training, from my understanding. So yeah, his legacy continues.
And then best book or research paper you've read in the last year?
Best book or research paper in the last year. Best makes it hard because I've read a lot of really good ones. I'm going to go with just the one I'm reading right now. and it's Ryan Halliday's Discipline is Destiny. I'm almost done it, and that's literally I'm going to caveat. I don't know if that's the best. That's just what I'm reading right now. So,
And you're enjoying it? It stands out to you?
I'm liking it. Yeah, he just does a great job of lots of stories of discipline and how it applies, and it's all the stuff we learned when we were about 7 or 8. But just need to remember, like, yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what other people say. Sticks and stones can't break my bones. Like, it's all that stuff, and just do the work.
That's so good. And then, biggest habit that you have added or taken away from your life that has provided the most value? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest, but maybe it could have been most understated, where it was like a small thing, but it turned out into something big. But in terms of like day-to-day structure, biggest habit that you've added or taken away in the past year?
Oh, and see, then you say the last year, and that changes it because I had an answer for you till.
Okay, well, whatever comes
okay.
to mind.
Okay, so last year I've been doing the cold plunge. That was a recent addition. My wife got me this little polar pod thing for Father's Day, I think, and then we realized that unless you like buying a lot of ice, you got to get the chiller for it. So yeah, I've been doing the cold plunge in a very disciplined fashion as part of my mindfulness routine. So now I'll practice my breath work and mindfulness in the cold plunge.
And then what is the cold plunge that you have now?
I think it's Ice Pod is what it's called. It's like $120. It's super portable, but the catch is you to really make it work, especially in the summer, you need to buy that chiller, which that costs a little bit more.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been absolutely amazing, Phil. I learned so much here in terms of performance and leadership and how to deal with stress. What is the best way if people wanted to reach out to you personally, and if people want to connect with you and the amazing stuff you're doing with Stonewater Training?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way to connect is website, stonewatertraining.com, and also on Instagram, Stonewater Training, LinkedIn, my name, Phil Kornichuk, pretty easy to find. But always looking to find kind of this purpose-driven, value-based individuals and teams to get behind them and help them level up their game, because that's how we change the world. Good people do better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hopping on Super Athlete Radio.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chase. Appreciate you.